So, folks, there's a show called Pod Save America. Now, on this show a few weeks ago, they had on the top Kamala Harris campaign staff in order to explain what went wrong in the 2024 election for the Democrats. And now I can tell you up front what went wrong for the Democrats. Very specifically, Kamala Harris allowed her economic messaging and policies to be dictated by her brother-in-law, who is an executive at Uber. He is someone who is a neoliberal. He wants, policies that fundamentally don't shift the status quo that much and wind up giving tax breaks for companies. That's what they want. Now, it turns out working people in America are not overwhelmingly fans of that type of economic messaging, and that drove a lot of people to vote for Donald Trump rather than Kamala Harris. It's one of the first elections in modern political history for where Democrats lost the working class. And the fundamental issue here is that the working class was not won over by the messaging of Kamala Harris when it came to economic issues. Now, you might say that's a problem with her messaging, but it's also a problem with her policy. It's both, right? I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that her campaign staff is not going to mention that, really. So let's find out.
Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Dan Pfeiffer. We have a special show for you today. I am here in Washington, D.C., where I'm about to sit down with the leadership of the Harris-Walz campaign for their first interview about what happened in the election. Last week, Michael Tyler, who's the communications director for the campaign, called me and said that they were ready to speak and that they wanted to have that conversation on Pod Save America. This is the first time that any of them have done an interview since the election. They don't pretend to have all the answers here. There's way more to cover than we could possibly cover in one podcast. This is the beginning of a conversation about understanding what happened in 2024 and learning the lessons that Democrats are going to need going forward. Joining me here in the studio in Washington were Jen O'Malley Dillon, who ran the Harris-Walz campaign, Quentin Folks, who's the deputy campaign manager and oversaw paid advertising, Stephanie Cutter, who oversaw messaging and communications, and joining by Zoom was David Plouffe, who consulted on all of it. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I feel like you could get to the bottom of this in less than an hour and a half, so I don't know. Let's see what they got.
For doing this. Very much appreciate you having this conversation with us here on Pod Save America. Just a level set, Jen, and I'll start with you. How did you feel going into Election Day? And at what point did you have a sense that things were beginning to break Trump's way? Was there a county result, something about the turnout? Like, was there a moment when you sort of understood that how it was going to end?
Well, the truth is that we really thought this was a very close race. We talked about the entire time we saw it as a margin of error race, almost the entire time the vice president was in the race. And we knew we had to have strong turnout on Election Day. We saw early vote really ending strong for us and saw, the types of voters we wanted to see turn out. But we expected this to be close. We also expected that Florida was going to come in a bit redder. Virginia, we knew was tracking to being, that we were going to be ahead, but that we would be ahead by less than we were in 2020. So we were expecting to see that when we saw that.
There's so much preemptive, bracing to lose here that it's kind of awe-inspiring in the worst possible way.
We also did anticipate that the night would go relatively long because some of these states would take longer to come in. But I think it was, really after polls closed, there was nothing that we saw throughout the day. There was nothing that we saw that told us there was overwhelming turnout or anything out of complete expectations on Trump's side. But it really took us into the hours of, polls closing for us to know for sure that things were not tightening. They were tight, but they weren't tightening in the direction we needed them to be.
And is that just because Trump's turnout was so high?
Well, honestly, I think it's a little bit mixed. I mean, we saw certainly Trump turnout high in early vote. We really believe that to be mode shifting, and that's what I think it was. I think we also saw turnout was as expected in rural areas. Like, we didn't see anything that said, like maybe we saw in 16 or even in 20 that he had more turnout than we had anticipated. And our analytics really was quite close, much closer than it had been in 20 and in 16. But I do think we saw some lighter turnout in some of the areas we had hoped, but difference of a point here or there, which obviously in a close race makes a huge difference.
They altered her campaign to make it as close as possible, and then like hand-wring about like, oh man, we couldn't have seen it coming.
And then I think we saw a little bit of a drop in support in a few areas for us. So that ultimately, I think, is why we weren't able to close the gap. It wasn't so much that what we were seeing in the battlegrounds was out of expectation or that he had some hidden turnout we hadn't picked up on.
David, when you say it was a margin of error race, you needed high turnout, what did your polls tell you where the race was heading into Election Day?
Well, Dan, you and I talked prior to the election, and just to rewind, I think when Kamala Harris became the nominee, she was behind. We kind of, climbed back. And even post debate, we still had ourselves down, in the battleground states, but very close. And so I think by the end, it was a jump ball race. And I think we needed some things to break our way. Maybe Trump's election day turnout would underperform. Our election day turnout would, either be at level or overperform. And, we'd win more of the people who decided in the last 3 or 4 days. I think our data and the New York Times data and other public data suggested we did have some progress with
You were banking on the people who don't make up their minds until like the hours before they have to go to the polls. What are you doing?
decided at late October. So it was a dead heat race. But, at the end of the day,
Like, honestly, all Democrats have to do is prompt more turnout of registered Dems. There are more registered Dems than there are Republicans. Like, you got to get those people to turn out. You got to then focus on the people who have no party affiliation. But come on.
the political
It
atmosphere.
doesn't even occur to them to attempt to appeal to the populist element of the party. The part of the party that is popular. Hence the populism.
It was pretty brutal, and that's not an excuse. You had right track, wrong track, I think 28-72, about 70% of the country saying they were angry and dissatisfied. You had
Angry and dissatisfied about what? What could a candidate do or say that might appeal to that?
Trump's approval rating on his first term, frustratingly high, 48-51, depending on the state. Obviously, the incumbent president's approval rating around 38-41, depending on the state. And, I think the economy and inflation still driving a lot of votes. So I think given that we had a challenging political environment, the fact that we got the race to dead heat was positive, but boy, it was slow moving. And I think we were focused on 7 states. That's our windshield into the world, the battleground states. But, what we saw on election day was, New Jersey and California and
Okay.
Connecticut and New
Fuck was
York,
that?
massive shifts. So I think where Kamala Harris campaigned, we were able to keep the tide down a little
It
bit,
was so loud.
but it ended up being a pretty strong, tailwind for Donald Trump. And I think it's worth reminding everybody, we saw in 22, even though that was a pretty decent Democratic year, we saw these shifts. We saw them in 20, we saw them in 16. Trump specifically, but Republicans generally improving their vote share amongst non-college voters, particularly non-college voters of color. And this was a surprising race because Kamala Harris actually did, I think, better with senior voters than I think a lot of people would have thought. So margin of error race where we inherited a deficit, we got it to even, but the thing never moved.
I mean, yeah, no, this sounds like these guys were like, yeah, the writing's on the wall, she's gonna lose, and then just were like nudging her into even more like prone to lose positions. Yo, Lady Raincloud, congratulations on becoming the SDDC communications co-chair. Let's go!
So to Jen's point, I think we were, we were hopeful. I
We
don't
stand people doing things in this community. Let's go.
know how optimistic we were, but we thought, okay, this is tied. And if a couple things break our way, and listen, I'm naive in this way. I just thought at the end of the day, particularly because Trump did not close well, and I thought Kamala Harris closed well. Trump was reminding people some of the things they don't like about him, that might give us what we needed. But at the end of the day, I think the political atmosphere, the desire for change, all those fundamentals that you've spent a lot of time talking about really presented huge challenges for us. So,
Well, yeah, it presents a huge challenge when people are demanding change and you have a candidate going out there saying fundamentally nothing is going to change. Like that's not a good thing for your candidate to be doing. Maybe she shouldn't have done that.
we got there, but we didn't get the breaks we needed on election day.
How deep was the hole that she had to climb out of?
Well, Jen, I mean, I think, listen, there was the Biden-Trump 1.0, which is obviously pretty catastrophic in terms of where the race stood. When we got in, my recollection is some of that snapped back, but, we were behind. I mean, I think it surprised people because there was these public polls that came out in late September, early October, showing us with leads that we never saw. I mean, it was just basically a race that in the battlegrounds was 46, 47, 47, 48. So that's not where we started. We started behind. She was able to climb out, I think, even after.
And then you stalled out for, like 3 months and lost support in that time because she shifted her entire messaging that was working. The weird attacks, the pro working class messaging, anti-corporate messaging, all of that stuff was resonating and working, and then you stopped it. You told her to cut it out.
After the debate, we might have gained, what,
Good night,
0.51?
Dragonfly.
It
I
wasn't a
understand.
race that moved a lot. And so I think when you think about our own internal analytics, if Wisconsin at 47, 47, or Pennsylvania 48, 47 Trump, let's say, which I think is where we had it at the end, you've got to have undecided break your way more than your opponents, and you've got to get a little benefit from turnout, which we weren't able to do.
Obviously, the defining event of this race was the candidate switch, and every decision you guys had to make, everything you had to do was defined also by the compressed calendar in which you were operating in. Quentin, you were there when that switch happened. How were you?
Like this switch wouldn't have been a problem if they had decent political acumen here. And they just kept having her hit the same messaging as Joe Biden, someone who's not that popular or well beloved in America.
There was a 1 month period between the debate and when the president actually dropped out. Obviously, it seemed like dropping out could be a possibility. Were you able to do any thinking or planning in that 1 month period about what a race with the vice president would look like? Or did you have to sort of start cold on that first day, the moment you got the call or the statement went out?
I mean, we started cold. There was no planning involved in any other candidates. I mean, we were honestly in crisis management mode of keeping President Biden in the race, convincing, Democratic allies that he could still do this. And one of the things was trying to keep the president out.
And as we now know from reporting released yesterday, Joe Biden's closest advisors knew going into the 2020 race, not the 2024, the 2020 race, that he was in cognitive decline and why they isolated him so much. You're trying to get this guy to go through again?
On the road as much. We were still doing everything we could from a campaign, and he made the decision that he did not want to continue on. And he pulled some of the senior leadership together and said that he was going to be with the vice president. It also wasn't anything that our team took for granted to just say, okay, she is the nominee. We knew that there was still a situation where we had to shore up delegates, and that's where we started from. And then after that point, that is when we began to say, okay, how can we define her? Also, Trump's favorabilities numbers were creeping up, as Pluff said, and we had to do something about that as well. And so it was a lot of walking and chewing gum at the same time, but there really was no sort of contingency planning to turn the race over to her right after that debate or at any point until President Biden definitively said he wasn't going to continue on.
Stephanie, I think what probably surprised a lot of people in politics was the vice president was a largely unknown quantity to much of the electorate. So you guys, under a very short time frame, had to do two things. As Quentin said, you had to teach people about her, and also make a case against Donald Trump, who had just come off, he was at an all-time high, come off the assassination attempt.
Alexandria Star, thank you so much for the raid. Welcome, Raiders.
In terms of messaging, how did you think about the balance between the two?
Well, the first thing we had to do is put on a convention, and we had about 3 weeks to flip a convention that was being built around Joe Biden. So we were able to flip it, to fit this very new character of a different generation, different experience, different background. And looking at the data at the time, which Jen and Pluff and Quentin have all talked about, she had a huge...
Yeah, like you can't do this change campaign if you're not divorcing Kamala Harris from Joe Biden. Like Gaza basically locked her down to Joe Biden's positions. And like, it could be that she did not feel comfortable breaking with Biden in ways like she felt like maybe she would be losing institutional support if she did that. But like, at a certain point, tough nuts. You're running to be president of the United States. This isn't like a game of patty cakes. You need to do what you need to do in order to win. And that might include pissing off your current boss. You're running to be president of the United States. Grow a spine.
Huge deficit in favorability because either people didn't know about her, or what they did know about her was based off of negative media. So our first priority was to define her in that convention, fill in her bio. As part of that...
And you defined her as being fundamentally the same as Biden, which is not a definition.
We already knew how to do the negative on Trump, and we knew that there was a lot of Trumpnesia out there. People didn't remember the 4 years of the Trump administration that badly because they had been through hell. They had been through COVID, both under his watch and under President Biden's. I'm putting aside a lot of the details of who's at fault and what Biden did to dig us out and all of that. And then they had to deal with inflation. So they had been through hell. So looking back,
Dems are
you remember
worthless.
A previous time much more fondly because you've now think that you've gone through the worst. So we had to remind people what life was like. That was our second imperative. And then the third imperative as part of the convention and leading into the remaining days of the campaign is what's that choice? What are the two very different visions between Trump and Kamala Harris? So the convention, it demonstrated a lot of enthusiasm for Kamala Harris, a lot of freshness, future-oriented, bringing a variety of coalitions together. We had independents, Republicans, Democrats, business leaders, sports.
Yeah, but maybe we could have done with a few less Republicans and a whole lot more leftists, like a whole lot more people who don't pay that much attention to politics until they see a headline that says Democrats to raise the minimum wage. Something like that. That gets people to polls. A potential tax write-off for the parents of newborn children, not so much.
Figures, everybody coming together around a new way forward and finally turning the page. Through the rest of that campaign, our next thing was the debate just a few weeks later, and it was boom, 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 all the way through probably early October after the Walz debate, that we had to move through these things so quickly. Once we got through all of that, then the race started to gel. And, to the extent people were open to remembering what life was like under Trump, we were trying to fill that in. To the extent people had questions about Kamala Harris, we were still trying to fill that in. So in 107 days, what typically takes us a year and a half, 2 years in a presidential campaign, we were defining someone who was wholly undefined from the start, trying to remind people about the opponent and what life was like underneath him, and also take into account what the political environment was and the realities that we had to deal with, which, she was the incumbent, but she really wasn't the incumbent. People didn't know that much about her. The economy was still slightly getting better, but we couldn't really take credit for it. So we were in a bit of a crossroads trying to figure out what that October messaging and closing messaging would look like.
Pluff, there was a
And you decided on shit? Of all the options, you decided on shit?
sort of a debate outside of your campaign that the primary and most important thing to do was to educate voters about Kamala Harris, and that voters sort of knew all they needed to know about Trump.
Also, what is
I take
this
it you guys
camera angle?
disagreed with that analysis and you felt a need to at least knock his numbers down a little bit. Is that right?
Of course. I mean, that is nonsense. So first of all, back to where the question you were talking to Stephanie about. Kamala Harris started this race, if I recall, with favorable 33 to 35. She ended it at 48. She actually ended the election with a higher approval rating than Donald Trump. I'm not.
Wow, great. Does that mean she gets to be president? No, it doesn't. Then shut the fuck up. Who gives a shit?
Sure, someone's won the presidency with a lower approval rating. So I think as people got to know her, they liked her. I think her approval rating now post-election is north of 50. That was really hard work. And I will say that, think about if
Oh, well, I'm so glad her approval rating post-election has gone up.
Kamala Harris had come out of a process that was traditional, running in and winning a primary. So maybe become the nominee March or April. You spend a month, 6 weeks on your biography. You keep coming back to it. You define the Trump first term. You raise the stakes of what a Trump second term would be like. You have like a month just to run paid advertising on things like housing and your tax cut. So this is where there was a price to be paid for the short campaign. And you can't even say 107 days, because to Quentin's point, some of that was spent shoring up the Democratic nomination. Then you really have to have said everything you want to say by the time people start.
And oddly enough, the part of the campaign where you shored up the Democratic nomination was the height of her popularity. All of the economic messaging that was popular and required to shore up her nomination evaporated after she got it. Almost like you should have continued that throughout the entirety of the general.
Voting early. So we had a little more than 2 months to do bio, contrast on the economy, on healthcare, raising the stakes of Trump. So yes, when you have a race where you've got the current incumbent president.
The thing that's infuriating about this is that these people are in such a different world that they cannot conceive that people are angry and disillusioned with our current system. And they know that a lot of politicians don't mean what they say when they talk about, reforms for the working class, And so they just want to try anything that might get them an improvement, even if that means trying Trump. And the way you deal with that is by honestly and openly advocating for economic reform. And then if someone tries to stop you, then you have to have the spine to point at them and say to the world, we are not getting this because of that guy. They are the problem here. You have to point the narrative in the direction you want it to go. It's not enough to just oh, well, we have the right opinion, so we'll win at the end of the day. Nope, you actually have to do shit.
President with approval ratings of, let's say, 38 to 40. Never in history have we had this before, at least since, I guess, Grover Cleveland. So once you have a former president running where 48 to 51% of the people approve of his first term, and people are dissatisfied with the direction of the country, you have to raise the stakes of what a second term would be like. So
yeah, this is where they're at right now, because again, no spine whatsoever. No spine whatsoever. Former President Bill Clinton reacts to a 2024 election. Yeah, time to turn into collaborators. People want to see government work, and we're going to hold Republicans accountable for whether they're willing to help move things forward for the American people. So if they aren't, then absolutely that will impact them at the ballot box, said Representative Suzanne DelBene, Democrat of Washington. Oh, who led House Democrats' campaign arm this year and will do so again in 2026. Time to collaborate.
I think for us, we spent much more time trying to raise the stakes of a second term than re-arbitrating the first because voters just weren't open to that. So that's why pointing out, his tariff and what that would mean in terms of a huge sales tax for the American people, the fact that he's more unhinged, he wants unchecked power. Project 2025 ended up being about as popular as the Ebola virus. So we did a lot of good work there. And now, of course, the son of a bitch lied about it and he's hiring everybody who authored it. Project 2025 is going to be the Trump administration agenda, as we pointed out. So we had to do that. So if we had just run a race solely on Kamala Harris positives, though we did a lot of that on what Kamala Harris wants to do on the economy, we did a lot of that. It's worth reminding your listeners who live in California, New York, or Alabama or Florida, you're not experiencing the presidential race as it's experienced in Pennsylvania, Michigan, North Carolina. We spent a lot of time, she spent a lot of time driving a core economic message. But in our view, that was not enough. When you've got someone whose first term was judged favorably enough by enough people to give him the election, and people are dissatisfied about where you are now, and you're part of that administration, you have to basically raise the stakes. And for us, it was on the economy. It was on the fact that all the people who stood in his way last time were warning us about him. It was about Project 2025. It was about abortion. And,
And ultimately, that all that stuff might be true, but at the end of the day, what people care about the most are what's going to put food on their table, what's going to let them get health care for their kid, what's going to help them make it through the next year, what's gonna make sure that they can get the health care they need, what's gonna make sure that they can get their parent into a nursing home. That's what people care about. These vague ideas about democracy are nice, but when you aren't plugged into politics, the thing that motivates you to the ballot box isn't going to be like, oh, well, I need to stand up for democracy. Because you know what? Democracy isn't helping you right now all that much, is it? When your concern is getting food on that table, some people decide to auction off that democracy for the chance at something better.
I think we did a good job of that based on our data, but we had to stay on that. So I think that is an incredibly faulty reading, that what we should have done is just lift up Kamala Harris. We clearly did. Her favorability rating increased by, I believe, 15 points. If you look at who do you trust more to look out for people like your family, who do you think is going to fight for the middle class?
You have to have actual policies that fight not just for the middle class, but the working class. The vast majority of people in this country.
Huge progress for Kamala Harris. Even on crime and immigration, we were able to make double-digit progress. So we were very focused on lifting her up. But to win a race like this, given the political atmospherics, which were quite challenging, we had to raise the risk of a Trump second term.
Jen, you guys are obviously operating in a very, very tough political environment. Incumbent president, very low approval ratings, as Pluff mentioned, wrong track, right track, approval of the economy, all very challenging. Also, in at least the public poll,
I don't know. By some estimates, half of America is middle class. But then 28% of America is lower class. It would seem to me that you could appeal to both middle and lower class, aka the working class, by embracing some economic populism. Throwing 28% of your potential voters under the bus seems like a bad idea.
Polling, huge desire for change, right? Frustration with the status quo. Not just that's here in the United States, we've seen that across the world since COVID. Challenging place to be if you were the vice president to the unpopular incumbent president. Felt like much of the convention, as Stephanie mentioned, was trying to make her a change candidate, talk about turning the page. Can you talk a little bit about how you tried to do that and whether you think she could or should have done more to distance herself from President Biden? Something that I think, as evidenced by the answer on The View, she was at least personally uncomfortable with.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, first of all, I think people, when they vote for president, want to vote about the future. And they saw in the vice president someone they didn't know.
Who are these people? These people are Kamala Harris's campaign staff. They are the ones who were in charge of her campaign. They were the ones making the decisions for her campaign.
Someone they didn't know a lot about a background. So,
perhaps the people most responsible for her loss outside of Kamala Harris herself.
She was, what she stood for, what she did as vice president. So
they're trying to save their careers? Ding, ding, ding. Exactly, Mr. Miyagi.
Every step of what we were trying to do, we had to tell a pretty robust story in one ad or one policy rollout or one event that you don't often have to do because of the time we were in. But I do think that we really focused from the get-go on how she was different than everyone else, different than Joe Biden, different than Donald Trump. And at the end of the day, the choice was her versus.
I'm sorry, what?
That we really focused from the get-go on how she was different than everyone else, different than Joe Biden, different.
You lying bitch. You had her go on The View and talk about how she was basically Joe Biden. This is not the messaging that you actually had her do. You liar.
Than Donald Trump. And at the end of the day, the choice was her versus Donald Trump. And at the same time, she was very clear that she was a new generation of leadership, but it wasn't just like a statement. It was, here's what I need to focus on. Her first policy announcements were economic, talking about housing, talking about lowering costs, understanding that people really didn't feel like things were progressing in the way that they wanted to, a la the right track, wrong track data, but how she brought her own point of view to thinking about housing, sandwich generation. That was probably her biggest applause line, one of the best testing things that we did. That wasn't a poll tested, let's work on this poll, this data to tell us this is the right issue we should go talk about. That was about her life and also understanding what people in the country were really needing. So I think that in a 107-day race, it is very difficult to do all the things you would normally do in a year and a half.
Dude, I am morbid. I'm about to lose it. All right, we're gonna skip this section about should Harris have tried to separate herself from Biden more, because the answer is just so resoundingly yes. And they're outright denying that they told her to be her own person. So, we're going to skip this portion because they're already full of shit.
Has been, even from some folks, anonymously at least, inside the campaign, some critique of some of the spending decisions around things like the set for Call Her Daddy, this, renting the Sphere.
Oh, Patrick Lucas, thank you for gifting a membership. That is very BWA of you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for supporting stream. Also, we have been going for 5.5 hours, chat. If you've been enjoying the show, hit the follow button on Twitch. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Like the YouTube stream. We're almost at 150 likes on the YouTube stream. I bet you guys can do it. I bet you can. There's over 200 people watching on the YouTube right now. Hit that like button, folks. You're 14 likes away. I know you can do it. And consider it whaling in the stream so I can keep making this show. You guys make this show possible. I couldn't do it without you. So, thanks, everybody.
That sort of stuff. Can you talk a little bit? I'd love to hear you respond to those criticisms, and then maybe give, just want to get clarity on the point, is that do you think when you guys have done all the books, that whether the DNC will be in debt at the end of this race?
So, first of all, I think it was an extraordinary testament to the vice president to have the kind of grassroots support that she had, and built on the foundation of the list. And
the grassroots foundation that she had was rooted in opposition to the capital class. It was rooted in the working class volunteers. The people who are most passionate about change in this country are working class Americans who go out there day after day grinding away for this political system.
The support that President Biden had and had built and we cultivated over years. We had some unique things that we had to do in this race that I think were really critical to do early, and spent a lot of resources at an early.
The section of the stream that I skipped, the section of the video that I skipped was about the trans problem. Good. I want to not have bloodshot eyes as a result of rage.
Your stage than we would have
Is that
traditionally.
ads?
But also the field program. I mean, we had massive investment of staff, 3,000 staff, hundreds and hundreds of offices in battleground states. We had canvassers and people out knocking doors.
And that's that's pre-Kamala Harris too, or is it?
Yeah, we 100% started at pre-Kamala Harris, and we've been building for it the entire campaign. But we really had to take it into hyperdrive because we had so much work that we had to do. We knew that we couldn't just reach people with one medium, and we had to make sure we were maximizing it. And we had to really move up spend when we're announcing the vice president as the new nominee. We are, a couple weeks later announcing a running-mate. We are, building out who is she standing for, all the things we've been talking about.
Like, I sympathize with the argument that, like, it's hard to jump in mid-campaign with a new candidate. I sympathize with that. But at the same time, like, oh, boo-hoo, did you as a communications team need to figure out how to use TikTok? Oh, boo-hoo. That's your job. You would have had to do that anyway.
And so those things cost a lot of resources, especially when
you had over $1 billion.
You're running 7 states. There was different opportunities for us to look at the battleground map and to say, is anything moving away from us? And we saw up until the very end that there was so much. Every single state was in such a margin of error. There was nothing that told us we couldn't play in one of these states. And we needed to ensure with Pennsylvania, which was our toughest of the blue walls from the beginning, where we were tied, what's the alternative to make up those electoral votes? So we ran a very wide map in other races that some of us have worked on together. We had to, move off of states. That was not actually part of our plan. And then we had to reach very hard to find voters. So we were trying to, yes, spend more resources on digital, not for the sake of that, but because we're trying to find young people. We're trying to find these lower propensity voters that were.
You did a really bad job at that. Because also, what's one easy way to maximize your, visibility on social media? Embrace popular narratives. You know what's really popular with everyone, regardless of age group? Getting free health care or higher wages. These are things you have the luxury of running on because you're ostensibly a progressive. Like, it's not rocket science, and it shouldn't have been surprising at all that people across America are considering this Luigi Mangione character some kind of folk hero. It's not surprising when tens of thousands of people die every year due to lack of health coverage. So, like, I don't know, doing anything that might address that would be instant headline news. But they got nothing.
Tuned out to politics so much of the electorate.
We'll negotiate 3 more drugs down. Woohoo!
Pre-Vice President Harris and post had opted out of political engagement, had opted out of wanting to talk through or hear the kind of partisan environment. So we had to work extremely hard to find them. And doing so made us make really key choices. Call her daddy was really an important choice to make. And the hurricane, which you're...
But also you could have gone on Joe Rogan's stream. Like, you could have done the Joe Rogan show. Like, oh, we were doing so many digital appearances. You could have done more.
Alluding to and why we had to make some adjustments on schedule. The hurricane impacted 2 weeks of our ability to reach people, not just in North Carolina and Georgia, but all across the country. I mean, we put her on the Weather Channel in part because that's where people were watching. So everything, of course, you can look at, did we get the best deal here? This was quite costly here. It's quite expensive. At the end of the day, though, I think if you look at the spend we had, majority of the money we spent, it was to reach voters. The money we spent at the end, I mean, Trump was every single day for the last 2 weeks of the race, he was dumping millions of dollars on our head on more points. And we didn't go chase him everywhere, but we had to look at What are people getting served? How do we match that? How are we hitting our voters and not getting distracted? How are we making sure the people that he's serving stuff to, we're getting to? And he had an army of super PACs that were so coordinated. I'm sure there's some legal way they were coordinated, but like,
I'm sure it was legal.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
or illegal.
Yes.
But they, from the beginning, they were, week to week, all, one super PAC would take a couple weeks and hit Pennsylvania, and then the next one would come in and do the same, and they were all coordinated. We didn't have the benefit of that. So
you have the benefit of having your candidate able to say whatever. If you have the candidate come out and give marching orders every day, that helps. You just gotta have them go out and say things that are popular to people. That economic populism, the thing that cuts through all of the culture war bullshit. It's hard for Republicans to distract away from issues if you're the one constantly recentering the issues.
I am very confident that the fidelity of our finances was strong throughout, and we focused it on direct voter contact. You mentioned the sphere. Of course, as you well know, to do something like that, we had to make some bets pretty early on. But we believed as we were closing the race that it was really important for people to feel like they were part of something bigger, and that we were trying to identify opportunities to culturally reach people, not just politically reach people. So while the point of the sphere wasn't really necessarily a Las Vegas play, it was a play to get the kind of attention and awareness, and to see in that, the song, and, just you want to be part of that. That was a big part of our strategy. It's why in Philadelphia we spent, and in all of our urban markets, real resources on out of home. Yes, billboards, but also murals and other ways that people could.
You were spending money on billboards and murals? You spent like half a billion dollars on the goddamn sphere. The Vegas sphere. Who gives a shit? Like, all of this is immaterial. When you look at some of the most popular grassroots campaigns of like the last, decade or two, they were driven by working class enthusiasm, not by like big flashy media appearances. No one gives a shit if you're on the sphere. No one cares about billboard advertisements. They care about what the content of the messaging is. And if they hear through the grapevine that like, oh, this candidate wants to raise minimum wage, this candidate wants to give you a tax break per child, this candidate wants to make your elder care free, this candidate wants to do debt relief for your medical debts, this candidate wants you to have Medicare for all, they're gonna vote for you. They care about the economic stuff. That's how you turn out people. People are, like, most people in America are busy. They have jobs. They got bills. They don't pay attention to politics like you guys do. So they just don't know. They don't hear about it. They don't know what's at stake. But they're listening to podcasts. Yeah, they're listening to some of the stuff they can hear on their commutes to work,
Walk down a street and they see something that's cultural and cool and something that connected with them, not in a political way, to reach people. And we felt like that was really, really important for the voters we had to reach. There is lots of important work that the DNC does week to week. We worked in tandem and in partnership this whole time. And part of the reason that the vice president was able to...
Yeah, all of these people should be fired.
be so quick is because of the campaign, but also because of the infrastructure and the work the DNC has done. So they're going to be in good stead. They're going to have everything they need. They continue to have a lot of money that they put out to state parties all.
And you know what? Like, Kamala Harris did raise an awful lot of money in her first week of campaigning, but like, at some point you need a politician that's going to have a spine, enough of a spine to say, yeah, you gave me that money. Thanks. I'm going to go use it to win and deliver for my constituents.
All across the country as part of the commitment that President Biden and Vice President Harris made when they came into office. So that work continues. It doesn't just stop when there's a campaign. They have more raising and more work to do. But we are going to be in a good space across the board, across all of our entities without debt. That carries forward. Yep.
Okay.
Having been through this, some time ago, but then witnessing again this time, we have to stop playing a different game as it relates to super PACs than the Republicans. Love our Democratic lawyers. I'm tired of it. Okay. They coordinate more than we do. I think amongst themselves, I think with the presidential campaign, like I'm just sick and tired of it. Okay.
Yeah. If only we had a Democrat with a spine who'd actually bothered to investigate this type of coordinated activity.
So we cannot be at a disadvantage, number one. Number two, to Jen's point, I think you don't want duplication, but I think having multiple players on the field, as long as they're well coordinated, is great. Like back in 20, I spent a bunch of time with Tara McGowan, who now runs Courier with Acronym, and all we did, I think, was $80 or $90 million, which was great. We only did digital low information voters, right? So whatever Future Forward was doing, we were very focused on that, particularly low information voters of color. So I think to have an ecosystem where, whether it's on issues like reproductive health or climate or, manufacturing or healthcare or a specific lane that you're focused on in terms of messaging, I think that's really, really important. I think that they tend to have more entities that are, to Stephanie's point, clearly it is not legal what they're doing, but we're at a disadvantage when our folks are playing by a different set of rules than they are.
I gotta be completely honest with you. Even like the issue with this election cycle wasn't even unfair coordination. It was just your candidate did not have a message that resonated with enough of the working class. You were able to get those liberals. You were able to get like a lot of folks, but you know what? You need the people who are toiling day in and day out to make this country work, and you're only going to get them with the economic promises of a New Deal. You had the FDR moment. You had in your grasp the ability to usher in a new age for the working class people of this country, or to embrace, a feckless milquetoast ideology and economic policy, and you lost as a result. You failed to rise to the moment.
I remember going back to 2012, you guys might remember this, like Mitt Romney's running around the country asking for specific dollar amounts at super PAC events. And we were told that Barack Obama couldn't even attend them.
He had to leave the room.
So like
the one event, I think, right?
Right. So I just think at the end of the day, this is important. Again, this is not at the top of the reasons that we had a different outcome here. But, to win close races, you kind of want to be maximizing every piece of the arsenal. And so I think this is something we really have to reflect on and make some adjustments going forward.
Did you need more cavalry at the end? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think we needed more cavalry early. Look, I think there's a lot of really important discussions I know you're having and we'll all have about the path forward. I think our side was completely mismatched when it came to the ecosystem of Trump and his super PACs and ours. And, that's not like just a head-to-head comparison on points spent. It is just how we have to think about our voters and what they need. And we had a super PAC that was helpful, very important and necessary for the work that they did, because they were the kind of central recipient of a lot of the funding on our side. And, they staked a strategy and a plan, and we clearly could see it, and we knew what it was to spend late. But we did not have the ability to have people come in with us early. And so every ounce of advertising, every ounce of carrying these strategic imperatives of defining the vice president and trying to bring down Trump's numbers all sat with us as a campaign. And because we had the strength of our list and because of the grassroots donors who were the heart and soul of this and our major
it's really impressive how they keep coming back to our grassroots donors, our grassroots donors, our grassroots donors. What about your grassroots volunteers? Like, you clearly couldn't be trusted to use that money in a way that was effective. Abandoned all of them by the side of the road.
Donors too, at a level we have never seen in politics before. We needed every cent of that because we carried like 90% of the bulk of it. And we needed to put North Carolina in play. We needed to make sure we're running this big map. We had
exactly, Lady Raincloud. Hi, as someone that was on the fucking ground in Ohio, you people fucked your down ballot campaigns. Exactly. It was an awful feeling.
A lot of work to do, and we didn't really have partners to call on in that early window. At the same time, there are really important groups out there that do important work that are targeting key coalitions. When we're talking about how we needed to reach young people and African Americans and Latinos, the voices and the strength of organizations that are not this campaign, that are not political, that have a history and a foundation of doing this work, that have credibility with different communities is really important for us. And I don't know that those entities got funded early enough. So I think this is just
Can I ask a question on this?
Yeah.
In the history of all of the presidential elections post Citizens United, the Democrats have had a designated super PAC. It was sort of, I don't know what the legal term is, but there's been one singular entity that was the recipient of all the super PAC dollars. It was Priorities USA in 12 and 16, and then it's been Future Forward in 20 and 24. Going forward, would your recommendation be that there be, like the Republicans, multiple entities that are all sort of viewed as important places for people looking to donate?
Yeah, like maybe some of the messaging should have been around what a tariff is, clearly.
To go to?
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion,
but that's why you're here,
is that there are a lot of really important groups that do shit really well, and they need the resources to go do that. We don't need to recreate the wheel, and we certainly don't need to funnel everything through one place. We need to have groups that have the ability to reach these very difficult to reach voters in ways that can be compelling and long lasting, have the funding that they need to go do that. And that to me means you are talking about a number of groups. Of course, you want them on the outside to coordinate well, and you don't want duplication. We've certainly seen in previous presidentials where everyone was stepping on everyone else and spending money in duplication. You don't want that either. But I think we have very sophisticated groups. They do it on the Senate cycle after cycle, and we have the benefit of learning and growing from that. And I also think that we should let people do what they do well and help support them in that and just have some coordination. So that would be my
like maybe you guys shouldn't be giving advice on the election having lost it so poorly.
Recommendation going forward.
So badly.
Stephanie, one of the I'm believed to be the more tedious post-election debates is about should Kamala Harris have gone on Rogan. Can you just, not to be tedious about it, could you talk a little bit about how close she came to doing it, why it didn't happen?
Yeah, there's a lot of intrigue around this, a lot of theories. It's pretty simple. We wanted to do it. I hate to
That's not true. If you wanted to do it, you would have done it.
Repeat this over and over, but it was a very short race with a limited number of days.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Getting on one of the biggest bro podcasts in the world, you make time.
And for a candidate to leave the battleground to go to Houston, which is a day off the playing field in the battleground, getting that timing right is really important. So we had discussions with Joe Rogan's team. They were great. They wanted us to come on. We wanted to come on. We tried to get a date to make it work, and ultimately we were just...
honestly, there is a timeline where Kamala Harris went on Joe Rogan and talked about tariffs. and what a tariff is. And we aren't living in
Why
a
go on Rogan
Donald
when you can
Trump
go on
world.
Reagan with Liz?
Like, Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 5 gifted tier 1 subs, but like, yeah, like I don't know, like, people need to know what tariffs are. Joe Rogan doesn't know what a tariff is. Go on there, explain what a tariff is, and then watch the election results just turn out differently. Why not go on Hassan? You could go on Hassan, sure.
Just weren't able to find a date. We did go to Houston, and she gave a great speech at an amazing event.
The Beyonce.
I mean, Joe Rogan wouldn't be good faith, but neither is any of these media. I think that if your entire plan is revolving around trying to convince, kind of derpy folks who haven't made up their minds, then you should go on Rogan, Rogan's audience is primarily derpy folks who haven't made up their minds about anything, So, like, honestly, if it's me and I'm looking at this situation, I have Kamala Harris go on Joe Rogan like the day before the election. Make sure that she is the last one in the room between the election and everything else, because that's gonna carry so much weight with Rogan listeners. The last smart person they heard is what they believe. Just have her be confident and explain what a tariff is on Rogan. It would be very different. But alas, we don't live in that world.
Amen.
Yes, well, I'm going to call it reproductive freedom. And because Texas is ground zero for the impact of these Trump abortion bans. There's a story out today, in fact, of another young woman who lost her life because of it. And we were hoping to be able to fit it in around that, and ultimately weren't able.
They're right wing on Rogan. Yeah, they are. But the other effect that you can gun for here is demotivating people from actually turning out to vote. Like let me put it this way: the most susceptible people to like a call to action are the people on Joe Rogan's show. Like are the people listening to that show. They're the people who are like, oh yeah, man, aliens. Yeah. Like that's it, And it's not nitpicking. It's just like, all I'm saying is they're not the brightest bulbs, and I think that they are easily conned. Hence why they listen to Joe Rogan. I also don't think she would have done well. I'm just saying that in an alternate reality, she goes on Joe Rogan, presents herself well, explains what a tariff is, and we aren't in the mess we're in right now.
Able to do it. As it turns out, that was the day that Trump was taping his Joe Rogan. Which they had never confirmed to us. We kind of figured that out in the lead up to it. She was ready, willing.
There are so many what ifs, but so much responsibility lays on the shoulders of these people.
To go on Joe Rogan. Would it have changed anything? It would have been it would have broken through, not because of the conversation with Joe Rogan, but because the fact that she was doing it. And that was really the benefit of it. Will she do it sometime in the future? Maybe. Who knows? But it, didn't ultimately impact the outcome one way or the other. But she was willing to do whatever it takes.
Yeah, Dan. So what's clear is we offered to do it in Austin. People should know that. Didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
I think, maybe they leveraged that to get Trump in studio. I don't know. And then, we were obviously not going to be back in Texas, but offered to do it on the road.
And he wouldn't travel.
Okay, we're about to done with this section here. Let's jump over to the most replayed portion of this, which should be the next couple minutes of this.
Who finds the masculine rhetoric and TikToks and YouTubers appealing, still has to pay his kids' childcare bills. So it's a choice that we have to make.
So maybe you should appeal to those voters with economic policy.
I said earlier that this isn't the problem of a 107-day campaign to solve. It's a party problem.
Mm-hmm.
Republicans don't make Trump apologize. And as Stephanie said, we don't have to
Yeah, because it's a cult of personality. It's a different ball game over there.
mimic it. But I think that there are a lot of times where if you're in the Democratic Party and you step out of line,
Yeah,
you get punished for it.
and that was what
Not
I was
by-
trying to say.
Thank you for being more direct, Quinn.
Yes.
You get punished for it by your own party.
I mean-
Republicans do not do that.
Look
They
at Kamala
stay in line.
Harris's comment.
Oh man, maybe we should, I don't know, do that, but for to move things in a more socialist direction.
It's in the 20
Maybe this is why we need people on the outside agitating and people on the inside agitating.
19 primary. The reason why even that was being discussed is because of interest-based politics.
I mean, we put out an ad with a cuss word in it, and the amount of feedback that we got
That's true.
was insane. And
From people within the party.
from people within the party, and like Republicans are, and it's like we have to. It's
we put out
it's
another one with
thing,
more.
right? Where we have to respond to that. Obviously, we take that stuff seriously. We reach out to the people that have concerns. That takes time from us. They're getting calls from people like Jen, people like myself, apologizing for this so that we're keeping our coalition together. Meanwhile, Trump is putting these Republicans in the worst possible political, or what would seem to be.
Yeah, because he's using power. The power in Trump's case is being used to power his campaign, versus the power in the Democratic Party is being used to squash any kind of dissent
And they support it.
against like the powers that be, but like up to and including like a presidential candidate.
Because they're, at the end of the day, they understand that it weakens Trump. And, this may sound like a shot across the bow, but it should be. Democrats are eating our own to a very high degree. And until that stops, we're not going to be able to address a lot of the things that just need to be said. And like for the masculinity piece of it, men don't like people that apologize. I don't know what age bracket, but it's called like standing on business. If you say something, you mean it. Trump does not apologize. If he says,
Well, also, Democrats don't mean what they say. That's one of the big issues with Democratic politicians. So, like, that's a big issue. But you're pointing it out in a non-productive way by, like, saying, oh, look at Trump. No, just look at the Dems, man. Oh, you just look at the Dems. They don't mean what they say. They come to play weasel games.
This whole rhetoric is insane. Trump spent the entire campaign connecting Biden and Harris and the Dems. Dems act like Trump is an aberration.
Yeah, and that's the things. That's the thing, right? Like a lot of people, I think we need to start normalizing saying Republicans instead of MAGA. Right? Because a lot of people have created this barrier between what is MAGA and what is Republican, as if MAGA is this entirely different thing. It's not. It's just what the mainstream Republicans are. Donald Trump is not like some freak of nature. He is the leader of the Republican Party. That's not he's not a fluke. He's been in power now for 8 years in charge of the Republican Party. So like almost a decade. And the thing is, they talk like the fever is going to break and Republicans are going to return to normal. The fever is never going to break. The fever is fascism, and it is fueled by Democratic inability to like improvise and improve themselves and embrace economic like revolution. People need higher wages. They need to be able to live. They need lower rents that allow them to get by. They need medical care. And like this failure to provide these things is what opens the door for folks like Donald Trump. There's a piece published earlier this week basically titled the real reason why Americans approve of Trump's disastrous transition. And ultimately, what the New Republic kind of tries to nail down is that essentially people are just not informed. People are low information voters. A lot of people out there are not able to pay attention. And when they are able to pay attention, it's for like 30 seconds at a time. It's long enough to read a headline. And so if that's what you're working with, if that's where the majority of people in this country are, then you have to meet them there. You have to hit them with headlines that tell you and encapsulate what your campaign goals are. You know, when someone sees largest mass deportation of undocumented immigrants, you know, they're like, oh, well, I know what that Donald Trump stands for. When they see like Kamala Harris teases child tax credit, your average American doesn't know what a tax credit is. You know, they don't know what that is. But if you say, you know, Kamala Harris champions Medicare for all, they have a schema for that, thanks to Bernie Sanders and like 8 years of campaigning on that phrase. You know, we have shorthands to communicate these positions, and they are just anathema to Democratic strategists and communicators. And a lot of it is trying to portray themselves as like the normal choice. And it's like, normal is not good for the working class people who have to live it. You know, they're not making a livable wage. They have to work 2 or 3 jobs. You know, like, it's not working for them. And what's not working for them is also not working for like people who make more than them and are just in a slightly better position. Like, we need bold political strategy for the times we're in, and Democrats haven't really been up to the task. And now, hopefully, the prospect of chaos and disorganization in the ranks of the Republicans mean that we may, in fact, be lucky enough to have another, you know, election cycle, but like, it's a really close thing, and we shouldn't be having to hope that. We shouldn't be here. And this is why, at the end of the day, I keep telling you guys, we need to get out there by joining DSA and showing up to every single one of our local Democratic meetings. Okay? We need people inside the party who care. We need people inside the party who understand the levers of power and how to pull them. We need people at the local level, at the state level, and at the national level. And if we get enough people in there, then we might actually be able to affect some real changes combined with pressure from outside the DNC as well. You know, that's why we need to organize in DSA. We need the parallel structure of the Democratic Party and DSA. We need to build alongside each other until we reach the top. And yeah, exactly, Amber Brains. The child tax credit talk doesn't help someone who doesn't have kids. It's not a universal program. Exactly. In DSA, you get to bully the feckless Democrats too? Exactly! So let's get out there and do this. I cannot stand to watch any more of these strategists jerk each other off in a desperate bid to save their jobs. But people like this are why we need to get into where these decisions are made. Because at the end of the day, they're killing us. And I don't know about you guys, but I'd like to stay alive. And I'd like my loved ones to stay alive. So let's do a little bit more than what we've been doing up to this point. Join DSA with me. Join your local Dems, and let's get some things done. I know we have a couple people in this community who've already added additions to their local Democratic Party, and that's amazing. And that's by just going to like 1 or 2 meetings so far. So the more of you who sign up, the more of you who get involved, the better off we will be. So let's go get to work.